The call came on a Thursday morning while I was standing on a job site in 40-degree wind, watching a crew frame the second floor of what would eventually be someone's dream home. My phone buzzed in my jacket pocket. Unknown number. I almost let it go to voicemail. Mr. Meacher. Caldwell? The voice was measured, professional. The kind of voice that belongs to someone who chooses every word carefully. This is Grant Ellison. I'm a forensic accountant. Your wife hired me 6 weeks ago to conduct a financial audit of your business records. I walked away from the crew noise, boots crunching on frozen gravel. I'm aware she did that. Sir, I need to meet with you before I submit my final report. Today, if possible. Not at your office. Somewhere private. I stood there in the cold, watching my breath cloud in front of me. Why would you call me instead of her? A pause. Long enough to feel deliberate. Because what I found has nothing to do with you, Mr. Caldwell, and I think you deserve to know what's in those books before anyone else does. My name is Daniel Caldwell. I'm 53 years old. For 22 years, I've been married to a woman named Patricia. We built a residential construction company together out of a 2-car garage in Charlotte, North Carolina, starting with nothing but a used pickup truck, a handshake contract with a local developer, and the kind of stubborn optimism that either makes you rich or breaks you. It made us comfortable, successful even. 3 crews, 7 full-time employees, a reputation in the region for custom builds that held their value. We had a 14-year-old son named Owen and a 12-year-old daughter named Cassie, who still drew horses in the margins of her homework. The trouble started, as it usually does, quietly. About a year before Grant Ellison called me on that job site, my wife began treating me like a suspect in a crime I hadn't committed. Small things at first. She started asking me for receipts I'd never needed to provide before. She started showing up unannounced at job sites, which she hadn't done in years. She'd gotten a second phone that she kept face down on her nightstand, and whenever I walked into a room, she'd tilt the screen away from me like I was trying to read her diary. I noticed all of it. I just didn't say anything yet, because I'd spent 22 years learning that, with my wife, timing mattered more than instinct. Then she suggested I step back from the financial side of the business. She said I was stretched too thin, that my strength was on the build side, the crews and timelines and supplier relationships, and that she'd always been better with numbers anyway. She said this with the same casual certainty she used when she told me I was bad at parallel parking. I agreed because she wasn't wrong about the numbers, and because agreeing seemed easier than fighting about it. That was my first mistake. Not the only one, but the first. I found the original red flag the same way most men find them. By accident. I was looking for the title on her second truck in the glove box, and I found a folded piece of paper instead. A printed email, creased like it had been read multiple times. The sender was someone named Douglas Farr, CPA. The subject line was Engagement Letter, Confidential Financial Review. The date was stamped 6 weeks prior. I stood in our driveway reading it twice. Then I folded it back exactly as I found it, put it back between the registration and the insurance card, and went inside and made dinner like nothing had happened. The thing about running a construction business is that you develop a certain patience. You learn to wait for the foundation to cure before you build on top of it. You learn that rushing the process always costs you more in the end. I applied that same logic now. I didn't confront her. I didn't change my behavior. I kept my face neutral and my eyes open, and I started paying attention to the details I'd been too trusting to notice before. I called my attorney 2 days later. Marcus Webb had been handling our business contracts for 9 years. I met him for lunch at a sandwich place off Independence Boulevard and told him everything I knew, which at that point wasn't much. She's having you audited, Marcus said, not particularly surprised. That means she's building a case, probably a divorce case. Based on what? I haven't done anything. Marcus unwrapped his sandwich. Doesn't always matter what you've done. Matters what they can make look like you've done. If she controls the books and she's been moving things around, she can make a pretty picture look ugly pretty fast. He looked at me. How long has she had full access to the financials? About 8 months. 8 months. He set the sandwich down. Daniel, we need to move quickly. I hired Marcus to start reviewing what records I still had access to. A week later, he called me with something that felt like a fist to the sternum. Our business operating account had seen a series of transfers over the past 7 months. All small. $2,000 here, $3,500 there. Spread across different payees, some legitimate-looking vendor names I didn't recognize. Total so far, about $68,000. Marcus thought it was probably more. The affair I suspected. The money I hadn't seen coming. I didn't sleep well for a week. I lay there next to my wife in the dark thinking about 22 years. I thought about the early days when we couldn't make payroll, and she cried at the kitchen table. And I told her we weren't giving up. I thought about the Saturday mornings she used to bring coffee to whatever job site I was on, and how she'd pull on a hard hat and walk the frame with me and ask questions, and actually listen to the answers. I thought about Owen being born 6 weeks early and how we'd sat side by side in the NICU for 11 days holding each other's hands. And I thought about the woman sleeping next to me now, who had opened a financial audit of her own husband and apparently decided the whole thing needed dismantling. My father was an architect. He'd spent 40 years drawing buildings by hand before CAD software made that skill feel like a relic. When he passed 6 years ago, he left me his entire portfolio. Rolled blueprints, bound sketchbooks, original drawings of buildings he designed going back to 1971. Some of them had been built. Many hadn't. All of them were extraordinary. I'd converted an entire wall of our study into storage for that collection. Climate-controlled cabinet, archival sleeves, the kind of care you give something irreplaceable. My kids used to pull out the sketchbooks and flip through them on rainy afternoons. Owen once told me he wanted to be an architect because of those drawings. When Grant Ellison asked me to meet him at a coffee shop in South End, I drove there not knowing what I was about to walk into. He was already there when I arrived. Early 50s, precise about everything. Gray at the temples. The kind of man who irons his shirt collars. He shook my hand and waited until I sat down before he opened his briefcase. "Mr. Caldwell, I want to be transparent about why I'm doing this. Your wife hired me to find financial irregularities in your business records that could support a claim of malfeasance or theft on your part. I agreed to the engagement." He paused. I did not find what she expected me to find. "What did you find?" He turned a manila folder toward me. Inside was a printed transaction summary, highlighted rows, dates, amounts, account names. "I found these. 64 transactions over 7 months. Total outflow of approximately $91,000. All initiated from the business operating account. All authorized with your wife's digital signature." I looked at the numbers on the page without speaking. "The transfers go to 3 destinations," he continued, tapping each column with a pen. "The first is a personal account under her name at a different bank. The second is a business entity registered 8 months ago called Farr Consulting LLC. I looked into it. The sole principal is someone named Douglas Farr, who is also the man who connected your wife with me." He let that sit for a moment. "The third destination is a property holding company called 1440 Prospect Holdings. I have reason to believe your wife is either a partial owner or a silent beneficiary." My voice came out steadier than I felt. "Who runs that holding company?" Grant Ellison opened a second folder. "A residential developer named Craig Holt. He operates out of the Ballantine area. They've been in contact by phone an average of 4 times a week for the past 10 months. He looked at me directly. "Mr. Caldwell, I'm a forensic accountant. I follow money. I'm very good at it. And the money in your business has been flowing toward a man your wife has been speaking to 4 times a week for 10 months. I'll let you draw your own conclusions." I sat with that for a moment. Outside the window, people were walking past with their coffee cups and their ordinary Thursdays. I thought about how easy it was to be ordinary. How much I would have given for ordinary right now. "There's something else," Grant said. He hesitated, and for the first time, he looked uncomfortable. "This part isn't financial, but I think you need to know." He pulled out a printed listing from an auction house website. I was cross-referencing asset records for the property holdings, and I came across this. The listing was for an architectural drawing. Original, hand-rendered, circa 1979. The seller name listed was Patricia Caldwell. The sale price was $11,000. The buyer was listed in California. I stared at the image on the page. I recognized that drawing. I had touched it with my own hands 100 times. It was my father's. "There are more," Grant said quietly. "I found 12 additional auction listings under her name over the past 14 months. All architectural drawings or sketchbooks. Total proceeds approximately $97,000. He slid the full list toward me. "I'm sorry, Mr. Caldwell. I thought you should know before any of this became a legal document." I don't know how long I sat there. Long enough for my coffee to go cold. Long enough for the lunch crowd to clear out and the place to get quiet. My father had held those drawings like they were sacred objects. He told me once that a building starts as a line on paper, and if you lose the line, you lose the memory of how it began. My wife had sold 86 of those lines for cash. I drove back to the job site, not because there was anything urgent to handle, but because I needed to stand somewhere solid. I stood in the framed-out shell of someone else's future house, and I made 3 phone calls. First to Marcus, who told me to hold everything and not confront her yet. Second to a private investigator named Lou Garrett, a former detective Marcus had used on 2 other cases. Third to my sister, who agreed to take Owen and Cassie for the weekend without asking why. Lou Garrett came back to me inside 72 hours. We met at a diner on the edge of University City. He was a compact man, mid-60s, quiet in the way that people are quiet when they've seen too much to be surprised by anything. He ordered coffee and pie and put a tablet on the table between us. Your wife and Craig Holt have been meeting at his lake house property in Lake Norman since at least last March, he said. I've documented 11 visits. The property is registered to 1440 Prospect Holdings, which is consistent with what your accountant found. She parks down the road and walks in. He swiped to a photograph. This was last Tuesday. I looked at the photo and felt something settle in my chest. Not anger exactly, something quieter. The confirmation of something I'd already known but hadn't been able to hold in my hands. There's more that I think matters, Lou said. He swiped again. Holt has been in conversations with the commercial broker who handles the block where your business office is located. He's trying to buy the building. According to my contact at the broker's office, someone gave him inside information about your lease terms, your renewal date, and your revenue numbers. He looked at me. That's not public information. I set down my fork. She gave him our financials. That's my read, and here's the part that connects everything. He pulled up a document on the screen. Holt filed paperwork 4 months ago for a development LLC. The project is a 40-unit residential community. The lead design-build contractor listed as a potential partner is a company called PC Builds, registered 2 months ago. He looked at me. Patricia Caldwell's initials. She wasn't just leaving. She was building a replacement, a new company, a new partner. Funded by money taken from the business we'd built together, with clients probably developed using relationships and reputation that belonged to Caldwell Construction. She'd been constructing her exit the same way we'd always built houses. One careful layer at a time. I met with Marcus the next morning and laid out everything in front of him. Grant Ellison's financial report, Lou Garrett's surveillance, the auction house listings. Marcus read through all of it with the focus of someone defusing something dangerous. Tell me about your marital agreement, he said. When we'd gotten married, my father had insisted, gently but firmly, that we needed a prenuptial agreement. He said it wasn't about distrust, it was about clarity. My wife at the time had agreed without much resistance, which I'd taken as a sign of her confidence in us. The agreement had a section, subsection F, that stated in any event of financial fraud committed by either party against the other, or against shared business interests, the defrauding party forfeited all claims to marital and business assets. I had not read that section since the day we signed it. Marcus had read it the night before. He set the copy on the table and tapped the paragraph. She forfeited everything the first time she moved money without authorization. She just didn't know you knew. He closed the folder. I want to file before she does. And I want to file big. Divorce on grounds of adultery and financial fraud. We attached the forensic report, the audit findings, the surveillance, all of it. What about the drawings? My father's work? Marcus's expression changed slightly. That's a separate civil matter and a strong one. She sold property that wasn't solely hers to sell. Depending on how title was held on those items, we can pursue recovery from the buyers, potentially through the auction house. It'll take time, but it's recoverable. I thought about that, about calling auction houses and explaining that the seller didn't have the right. About tracing those drawings to living rooms in California and Georgia and wherever else they'd ended up. About my kids never being able to sit on a rainy afternoon and flip through their grandfather's sketchbooks again. File everything, I said. All of it. One more thing, Marcus said. He slid a document across the table. We should move for emergency custody before she's served. Once those papers land in her hands, we can't predict what she does. She may try to take the kids to Holt's property, or delay the proceedings by making custody contentious. My kids come first. Whatever you need to do. The papers were served on a Friday afternoon. I know the exact moment it happened, because Lou Garrett texted me a single word. Dawn. My wife was at her home when the process server arrived. I was at the job site. My sister had the kids. She called me 11 times in 30 minutes. I let each call go. The 12th time, I picked up. Daniel. Her voice was shaking. What did you do? I filed for divorce. On grounds of adultery and financial fraud. This is insane. You're overreacting to. $91,000, Patricia. Transferred out of our operating account over 7 months. I have a forensic accountant's report. Silence. I also know about Craig Holt. The lake house in Lake Norman. The 11 visits since March. The new LLC registered with your initials. More silence. When she spoke again, her voice had gone flat. I want to talk about this in person. We can work this out. I also know about the drawings. The silence this time lasted so long I thought she'd hung up. Then, those were just sitting there. They were taking up space and you never even. They were my father's. My voice came out quieter than I intended. You sold my father's work to strangers for $97,000, Patricia. And you did it while you were planning to walk out the door. She didn't have an answer for that. She tried to find one for several seconds and couldn't. My attorney will be in touch, I said, and ended the call. When I pulled into my sister's driveway that evening, Owen was in the yard throwing a football against the fence by himself. He lowered the ball when he saw my truck and walked over slowly, the way a 14-year-old walks when he knows something is wrong but doesn't want to be the one to say it first. Dad, what's happening? I crouched down to his level even though he didn't need that anymore. Your mom and I are separating. It's going to take some time, but you and your sister are going to stay with me during that time. He nodded once, absorbing it. Because of what she did? I looked at my son and I thought about how much to tell him and how much to protect him from. Yeah, because of some choices she made. He looked at the football in his hands. Is Grandpa's stuff gone? I heard you on the phone. I wasn't trying to listen. There are moments in fatherhood that hit you harder than anything you've prepared for. I put my hand on his shoulder and I told him the truth. Some of it is gone. We're going to try to get it back. I promise you we're going to try. He nodded again, jaw tight, the way it gets when he's trying not to cry. Then he threw the football back against the fence and watched it bounce. The hearing was set for 9 in the morning on a gray Tuesday in February. The courtroom had that particular exhausted smell of old carpet and deliberate procedure. My wife arrived with her attorney, the sharp-eyed woman named Caroline Drake, who had a reputation for aggressive settlement negotiations and not much else. Marcus had told me not to be fooled by the pleasant voice. I wasn't. Craig Holt was not present. He had reportedly retained his own attorney the week before and was cooperating with nothing and no one, which my attorney found encouraging. Judge Raymond Okafor was 61 years old, known in the Charlotte legal community for an exact and impatient intelligence. He read quickly, asked sharp questions, and had no patience for procedural theater. We're here for Caldwell versus Caldwell, he said, settling in. Dissolution of marriage, custody arrangements, and emergency financial orders. Mr. Webb, you filed. Let's hear it. Marcus stood and laid it out the way a good contractor lays out a project. Clean sequence, nothing wasted. The $91,000 in unauthorized transfers. The forensic accountant's report documenting the movement of funds to Holt's holding company. The surveillance confirming an ongoing extramarital relationship. The newly registered competing LLC built using marital business assets. The auction house records showing the sale of property that did not belong solely to the respondent. Caroline Drake objected twice. Judge Okafor sustained neither. Your Honor, Drake finally said, my client acknowledges that certain financial decisions were made without her husband's full knowledge, but characterizing them as fraud is the prenuptial agreement. Judge Okafor said, not looking up from the document. Subsection F. Your Honor, the applicability of subsection F is clear and unambiguous, Counselor. In the event of financial fraud committed by either party against the other or against shared business interests, the defrauding party forfeits all claims to marital and business assets. He set the document down. Your client signed this agreement. Do you dispute her signature? Drake hesitated. No, Your Honor. Then help me understand what's ambiguous. My wife sat very still at the table across from me. She was dressed carefully, hair done, the composed presentation she wore whenever she needed to project control. But her hands were flat on the table in front of her, and her knuckles had gone white. Mrs. Caldwell, Judge Okafor said, do you want to respond to any of these findings? She stood slowly. I made mistakes. I'm aware of that. The transfers were intended as a loan to myself, that I planned to repay. Craig Holt and I had a business relationship that became something more complicated. I accept responsibility for that." She paused. "But my children are my children, and I am asking the court not to use my personal failures to separate me from my kids." Judge Okafor looked at her for a long moment. "Mrs. Caldwell, the prenuptial agreement you signed includes specific penalties for the exact behavior documented here. I find the evidence credible and substantial. Temporary full custody is granted to Mr. Caldwell. Mrs. Caldwell will have supervised visitation on alternating weekends. All joint accounts are frozen immediately. Mrs. Caldwell is prohibited from selling, transferring, or otherwise disposing of any marital or business assets pending a full audit." He looked at Drake. "I'm also ordering an investigation into the transfer of intellectual property, specifically the architectural works referenced in Exhibit 7. If those items were sold without proper joint authorization, the proceeds are recoverable as marital assets, and the buyers may have a claim against the seller for fraudulent conveyance." He set down his pen. "Mrs. Caldwell, you built something real with your husband over 22 years. You had every right to leave this marriage. You had no right to dismantle it on the way out. This court takes that distinction seriously." He stood. "Next case." We walked out of the courthouse into cold February air. Marcus shook my hand without ceremony. "That's about as clean as it gets." "The drawings," I said. "We'll pursue everyone. The auction house will cooperate once they get our legal notice. Some buyers may fight it. Some will return them voluntarily when they understand how the items were sold." He adjusted his briefcase. "Daniel, be prepared for some of them not to come back. But we'll recover what we can." I stood on the courthouse steps and thought about my father's hands. The way he used to hold a pencil, very lightly, barely touching the paper, like the lines needed to be coaxed rather than forced. He told me once that the best buildings start as the quietest ideas. Owen and Cassie were at my sister's house when I got there. Cassie ran to me and wrapped herself around my waist the way she had since she was 4. Owen stood in the doorway reading my face. "We got custody," I said. "You're both coming home with me." Cassie started crying into my jacket. Owen came down the steps and hugged me from the side without saying anything, which from a 14-year-old boy is about the most you can ask for. The months that followed were long, but not without direction. The forensic audit, once completed, found that the total transferred out of company accounts was closer to $114,000 over 9 months. My wife had been careful, but not careful enough. She had not understood that careful and invisible are not the same thing when a forensic accountant is looking. Craig Holt, once the legal proceedings became public, distanced himself with the particular speed of a man who had never intended to be accountable for anything. He retained counsel, denied business wrongdoing, and, according to Lou Garrett's contact in Ballantine, had started spending considerably more time at his second property in Asheville. The PC Builds LLC was dissolved 4 months after its registration date. Having never received a single contract, my wife moved into a rental apartment near South Park. She came to the supervised visits with a composed expression and brought the kids things they didn't need. Owen tolerated it. Cassie cried on the way home the first 3 times and then gradually didn't. Kids adapt in ways that are both reassuring and heartbreaking. The auction house cooperated fully once Marcus sent the legal notice. Of the 86 items sold, they were able to provide detailed buyer information on all but 3. 19 buyers contacted voluntarily after receiving letters from Marcus explaining the circumstances of the sale. 7 returned items without demanding reimbursement. 12 accepted full reimbursement and returned the pieces. The remaining buyers either didn't respond or required legal intervention. In the end, after 14 months, we recovered 61 of the 86 drawings and sketchbooks. Not all of them, but 61. I had a carpenter build a new cabinet for them. Better than the old one. Owen helped me slide each piece into its sleeve. He held one of the returned sketchbooks, the one from 1974, and opened it to a page his grandfather had drawn of a house that was never built. 3 bedrooms and a wide porch looking out over something that might have been a lake, or might have been a meadow. The perspective slightly dreamlike in the way his father's early work had been. "He would have been a good architect," Owen said. "He was a good architect. I mean, for now. Like if he were around now." I looked at the drawing. The quiet, careful lines. The restraint of it. Yeah, he would have been. The divorce decree came through in October. I kept the house. I kept the business. I kept primary custody of both kids. My wife was ordered to repay the transferred funds at $1,800 a month. At that rate, it would take her over 5 years, assuming she maintained steady employment, which her attorney had represented she would. Craig Holt had moved on in the way that men like him always move on, with the facility of someone who had never truly committed to anything in the first place. My wife discovered this around the same time the court proceedings concluded. I heard about it from Owen, who heard about it from Cassie, who heard about it in a manner I didn't ask her to elaborate on. I didn't feel vindicated by that particular piece of news. I felt something more like exhausted recognition. Some people's mistakes punished them in ways courts never could. On a Saturday in November, I was in the study reorganizing the cabinet when Cassie came in and sat on the floor next to me, crossing her legs and leaning against the wall the way she does when she wants company but doesn't want to ask for it. Dad. Yeah. Are you okay? Like actually okay. I held a blueprint between my hands. 1982. A community center my father had designed in Durham that had been built and was still standing. Getting there. That's not the same as yes. I looked at my 12-year-old daughter, who had apparently decided to skip several years of emotional development and arrive somewhere considerably more sophisticated. No, it's not the same as yes, but it's honest. She nodded, accepting this. Owen thinks you should see someone, like a therapist. Owen thinks a lot of things. He's usually right. I laughed. Genuinely, for the first time in a while. He is usually right. I set the blueprint in its sleeve and slid it into the cabinet. Outside, November was doing what November does in Carolina. Cold but not yet committed. Everything amber and uncertain, and somehow still beautiful if you were willing to look at it that way. My wife had taken a lot from me. Money that should have stayed in the business we'd built together. A year of sleep. My assumption that the person beside me at night was still the person I'd married. And 86 pieces of my father's work, 25 of which I would never hold again. Never slide into a sleeve. Never watch my kids flick through on a rainy afternoon. But she had not taken the 61 that came back. She had not taken the business, which was still mine, fully and without contest. She had not taken my kids, who were both currently in my house, one watching football and one sitting on my study floor offering unsolicited emotional wisdom. She had not taken the 22 years of knowing how to build things, how to read the ground before you pour a foundation, how to recognize when something is solid and when it only looks that way from a distance. I closed the cabinet and sat down on the floor next to my daughter. She leaned her head against my shoulder without saying anything. We stayed there like that for a while, quiet in the good way. The way you can only be quiet with people you trust completely. Outside, a neighbor's kid was riding a bike in circles at the end of the cul-de-sac. The light was coming in at that low, late afternoon angle that makes everything look slightly more significant than it is, or maybe exactly as significant as it is. I hadn't decided yet. What I had decided was that the cabinet was full, and the business was running, and my kids knew exactly who their father was. And on the days when none of that felt like enough, I tried to remember what my father used to say when a project went sideways and people wanted to walk away from the work. The foundation is still good, he'd say. We rebuild from there. He was usually right. Owen got that from somewhere.